in which the N words, I'm just not going to say that on broadcast media. The N words beat each other up, and the police and magistrates do not know which way to turn when faced with the astonishing waves of crime in North Africa. We shall later see later how this phenomenon should be judged in a later chapter. So he talks about this internalized violence of Native peoples against each other, that is an expression of their psychological helplessness. Um, and we might think of it as something like gang violence in the United States later on, of course. Page 53, you can't say that he says the native's muscles are always tense. You can't say that he's terrorized or even apprehensive. He is, in fact, ready at a moment's notice to exchange the role of the quarry for that of the hunter. The native is an oppressed person whose permanent dream is to become the persecutor. So he's talking about this on a psychological level, of course. And another recent book that's worth checking out, by last name Mishra, Age of Anger, and very much in a kind of post-Hannah Arendtian fashion, is analyzing like the rise of rage and anger in a global way. Mishra's book would be an interesting parallel here. Really nice work. Page 54, he says, thus, collective auto-destruction in a very concrete form is one of the ways in which the native's muscular tension is set free. And so what happens is, in that internalized violence, it can be a native against native violence, but it can also be a self-loathing, a self-violence. So it can be suicide, it can be mass self-harm, drug abuse, depression, mental illness, whatever you want to call it. And it becomes almost fated to be that way. He turns more and more to psychoanalytic language. At this point, he talks about the libido on page 55, but he says that the libido for the colonized person is not like this individualized, like rational agent libido. He says one of the characteristics of underdeveloped societies is, in fact, that the libido is first and foremost the concern of the group or of the family, the feature of the communities whereby a man who dreams that he has sexual relations with a woman other than his own must confess in public and pay a fine in kind or in working days to the injured husband or family, is described by ethnologists. We may note in passing that this proves that the so-called prehistoric societies attach great importance to the unconscious. This is interesting that he turns to the unconscious and to native peoples, which would be in line with the kind of primitivism that happened as the result of the European fantasy structure. But instead, Fanon is going to read the native group situation instead of the egoist version as having. And in a more recent thought from my friend King Tinker, or some other current indigenous thinkers like Mark Freeland, his book on decolonizing the mind, Ajhea Dizi, he's
Mr. Sibia.
Yes.
Yeah, we're just gonna hold on for a bit now, and see if more comrades join us. So hence I'm playing this video, so we can just fill in space. But he's also basically going through some of the notes of chapter 1, which we will be wrapping up today. So thank you for joining us, but yeah, let's just give it another 10 minutes, 15 minutes and see if more comrades join us. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, cool. No problem.
Sure.
From the Great Lakes region. Mark Freeland's book. I think that's a more current way of thinking about this, like with cognitive science. But it's just Fanon's background as a psychoanalyst here, where he's talking about um, uh, uh, something deeply situated in the unconscious, which might be like worldview, but he's taking a different turn and not just calling it so sort of primitive. He's saying that the so-called primitive is the one who's actually been taking the unconscious more seriously than the colonized peoples, than the colonizer classes of peoples. So he turns to talk about zombies and magic on page 56, to mujahideens, to possession over on page 57, and exorcism. He mentions legba and voodoo, vampirism, possession by jinns, zombies, legba. And then what we're getting there, if you like kind of think about the places where legba is, or the places where jinns are, he's connecting the conditions of oppressed Arabic people to oppressed Caribbean people, right? So that's part of Fanon's analysis. Moves beyond geographical territories, because of course
Yeah,
colonialism itself does that sort of thing, like the conditions
yo,
of
I'm just busy with
colonialism.
the workshop quickly, man.
Over on page
I'm just
59,
busy
he
with the
says, now the
workshop on
characteristics
Jitsi, man.
feature of certain political
Guys
structures is
now,
that they
best side for
proclaim
your work, dog
abstract
life.
principles but
Hopefully.
refrain from issuing definite commands. And so what
Yeah,
happens, this
I'm just
happens in
busy
like
quickly,
like
man,
the
with the
emergent
workshop.
struggle for a so-called liberated or post-colonial society, is you
Work
get
them
these kind
ILS
of
inside.
puppet politicians who have native ancestry, who seem to speak for the natives, but they call out these like uh, liberal, sometimes democratic values, such as one man, one vote. Um, but it has a kind of emptiness in the cultural situation. He says the national political parties never lay stress upon the necessity of a trial of armed strength, for the good reason that their objective is not the radical overthrowing of the system. So these people end up upholding the system instead of actually being anti-colonial in an authentic sense. Over on page 60, he says, quote, government by the workers. And they forget that in the country it should be nationalist watchwords which are first in the field. The native intellectual has clothed his aggressiveness in his barely veiled desire to assimilate himself to the colonial world. He has used his aggressiveness to serve his own individual interests. Now, this is a pretty deep critique of the so-called native intellectual, and I think that again pushes against the idea of just trying to call out Fanon for having grown up in a situation of relative privilege. Um, he maneuvers on. I'm going to skip a few pages again just for time. He mentions the Berlin Conference of 1884 to 1885, in which the colonial powers basically divide up Africa among the European nations, and comes over on page 67. He mentions religion again. He says the colonialist bourgeoisie has helped in its work of calming down the natives by the inevitable religion. All those saints who have turned the other cheek, who have forgiven trespasses against them, and who have been spat on and insulted without shrinking, are studied and held up as examples. On the other hand, the elite of the colonial countries, those slaves set free when at the head of the movement, inevitably end up by producing an ersatz conflict. They used their brothers' slavery to shame the slave drivers or to provide an ideological policy of quaint humanitarianism for their oppressors' financial competitors. The truth is that they never make any real appeal to the aforesaid slaves. They never mobilize them in concrete terms. On the contrary, at the decisive moment, that is to say, from their point of view, the moment of indecision, they brandish the danger of a quote mass mobilization as the crucial weapon which would bring about, as if by magic, the end of the colonial regime. Obviously, there are to be found at the core of the political parties and among their leaders certain revolutionaries who deliberately turn their backs upon the farce of the national independence. But very quickly, their questionings, their energy, and their anger obstruct the party machine, and these elements are gradually isolated and then quite simply brushed aside. Over on page 68, he says, politicians avoid the actual overthrowing of the state, but in fact, they introduce into their readers' or hearers' consciousness the terrible ferment of subversion. So the national or tribal language is often used, and so we get this kind of like soft attention to identity of the colonized peoples that inspires subversion, but then that inspiration for subversion turns into identity. We Negroes, we Arabs, in these terms, which are so profoundly ambivalent, take on during the colonial epoch a sacramental signification. And so with that kind of identity politics of calling a certain group into being to call itself to give itself a kind of self-confidence, it also introduces subversion. But because the state apparatus is still basically, the colonial state apparatus is still in place, what it does is it ends up being a way of ferreting out potential real opposition to the state regime by people coming out and protesting or claiming a positive sense of their own identity, right? It's something that Foucault will later call governmentality, but we saw it in Marcuse as well last week. And it's something that we should think about as we maneuver into the second half of the 20th century, where we have like an explosion of discourse in identity politics. What is the work that identity politics does under totalitarian regimes or under neoliberalism, for example? What it does is it gives the powers that be a way to keep tabs on potential subversives, right? He turns his analysis on page 70 to Vietnam, and then he compares it to Congo. He says this is why he's talking about the revolt in 1954, which is in Vietnam against France, of course. This is why a veritable panic takes hold of the colonialist governments in turn. Their purpose is to capture the vanguard, to turn the movement of liberation toward the right, and to disarm the people. Quick, let's decolonize. Decolonize the Congo before it turns into another Algeria. Vote the constitutional framework for all Africa. Create the French communauté, communauté, sorry. Renovate the same communauté, but for God's sake, let's decolonize quickly. And so decolonization, the idea of decolonization gets appropriated by the so-called by the colonizers through some sort of like liberal intention. But what it also is doing is because like there's been a regime of capture that has now been able to take account of identity.
Greetings, comrades. Welcome to the fourth session that we're having. We're basically wrapping up with the first chapter in the book The Wretched of the Earth by Frantz Fanon. Yeah, welcome. And so we've covered in the previous sessions, we've covered some of the thinking, unpacked some of the thinking of Fanon. And today, I'm unfortunately not getting a hold of Masitole. I is also probably having some Mother's Day events on his side, as he has been posting some Mother's Day issues of his wife and his mother. So I apologize for him not being here this week. At this point in time, we are 4 people in the space. And yeah, I would like to open the floor because I would like to open the floor if there's any reflections, right? The the mission and the vision of us coming together, it's to intentionally read Fanon and contextualize it with our positions in society as young people, as adults, young adults, as people that are interested in reading, because yeah, we are a diverse group of people that have joined this forum. We would like to have reflections based on our personal circumstances, if it's possible, and then also within the current state of affairs of our country, right? With capitalism deepening itself, right? And imperialism in that sense deepening itself, and then also thinking of the nuances of the state, of the government, of neo-apartheid, of the negotiated settlement, and all of the traditions of thought that we get in South Africa, right? As we have a very dynamical political space and ideological space as well. But yeah, we find ourselves within different terrains, political terrains, civil society, corporate South Africa, the grassroots, academia, wherever we find ourselves. So Pakamani, Chesley, and Mkondisi, yeah, and so I would like to open the space just so we can get some reflections. I trust Comrade did scan through the chapter. So yeah, the floor is open. Welcome. I would actually, I'm gonna read a small like a small quote from Fanon at like just as he ends the chapter, basically. So he's like, let us confess, we believe that the huge effort demanded of the people of the underdeveloped nations by their leaders will not produce the results expected, right? And if working conditions are not modified, it will take centuries to humanize this world which the imperialist forces have reduced to the animal level, you know. And yeah, and then he also speaks about reparations and stuff like that. But with that, I would like to just open the floor, as yeah, in context of South Africa and our freedom, or so-called freedom. Yeah, leadership, thank you very much. The floor is open. You can unmute yourself. Thank you. Comrades, uh, if no one is gonna say anything at this point, we can just watch, continue to watch this reflection by this gentleman, because the point of the reflection is not for me to talk over anyone, right? We're coming together as a group. Hence, we all came here with the intention to learn and to explain. So Bandile, Chesley, Pakamani, Mr. Sibia. Yeah, the floor is open, comrades. Thank you. Comrades, am I audible? Can you hear? Can you guys hear me? Okay. Okay. I'm gonna play this video.
Formations of colonized peoples, the intelligence in some respect has been gathered, then what pushing towards those movements and towards a right-wing nationalism within those movements then is just another way of perpetuating a just kind of war against the native peoples to then justify the fact that they can't run their own country, for example. The need for the settler colonial person to be there. Page 71, the settler who, quote, understands the natives is made aware by several straws in the wind showing that something is afoot. Quote, good natives become scarce. Silence falls when the oppressor approaches. Sometimes looks are black and attitudes and remarks are openly aggressive. The nationalist parties are astir. They hold great many meetings. The police are increased and reinforcements of soldiers are brought in. The settlers, above all the farmers isolated on their land, are the first to become alarmed. We could look at that with later iterations of mujahideen that are, of course, fostered by the Central Intelligence Agency. People like Osama bin Laden, at least early on, who's working with CIA, and then the encouragement of fostering something like a radical Islamic identity, fostered by CIA to create uprisings against the Soviet Union, right, in places like Afghanistan during the 1980s, to call out the godless communism by helping to foster a kind of radicalized religious identity, and that, of course, is right leaning and or right wing leaning, right, and terribly oppressive. And that gets unleashed, and the more that gets unleashed, the more it justifies the presence of an intervention of an entity like the United States in various places in the world. Over on page 73, as a general rule, colonialism welcomes this godsend with an open arms and transforms these blind mouths into spokesmen and into 2 minute and in 2 minutes endows them with independence on the condition that they restore order. So then it just becomes part of this self-perpetuating sort of feedback loop of a machine of creating chaos and then creating the conditions by which control must be reinstated. At the bottom of the page on 73, when militarist Germany decides to settle its frontier disputes by force, we are not in the least surprised. Um, uh, but when the people of Angola, for example, decide to take up arms, when the Algerian people reject all means which are not violent, these are proofs that something has happened or is happening at this very moment. The colonized races, those slaves of modern times, are impatient. They know that this apparent folly alone can put them out of the reach of colonial oppression. A new type of relations is established in the world. The underdeveloped peoples try to break their chains, and the extraordinary thing is that they succeed. If it that in these days of Sputniks, it is ridiculous to die of hunger, but for the colonized masses, the argument is more down to earth. The truth is that there is no colonial power today which is capable of adopting the only form of contest which has a chance of succeeding, namely the prolonged establishment of large forces of occupation. So, again, it's the natural conditions, it's the economic conditions that Europe can't maintain its colonial hold, especially after World War II. And so that changes the colonizers' attitudes to this kind of like helping people establish democratic regimes or something like that in different countries in the world, but it ends up being a kind of puppet game that's just mentioned in the name of something like people being free. But that that rhetoric is really just hiding the fact that a actual controlled occupation won't necessarily work anymore. He moves down to Moscow and to the domino theory of the Cold War. Of course, this has been written at the height of the Cold War, and he will mention Castro and Cuba and Kennedy. He says that Moscow, like he doesn't say that like the post-colonial movements like are necessarily need to be communist, but they definitely align more with Moscow. On page 74 here, he says, finally, there is a well-known myth of liberating movements directed from Moscow. In the regime's panic-stricken reasoning, this signifies if that goes on, there's a risk that the communists will turn the troubles to account and to infiltrate into those parts. Again, that's like an attention to what we call in U.S. foreign policy the domino theory, that the U.S. must intervene in Vietnam when France is not able to hold control anymore, because if they don't, then Vietnam will go communist. Right. Over on page 75, he says, in 1789, in the French Revolution, right, after the bourgeois revolution, the smallest French peasants benefited substantially from the upheaval. But it's commonplace to observe that, say, in the majority of cases, for 95% of the population in underdeveloped countries, independence brings no immediate change to them. The enlightened observer takes note of the existence of a kind of masked discontent, like the smoking ashes of a burnt down house after the fire has been put out, which still threaten to burst into flames again. So they say that the natives want to go too quickly. Now, let us never forget about uh, forget that only a very short time ago they complained about their slowness, their laziness, and their fatalism. So now Native peoples want everything too quick. Like, hold on, kind of like with if you read Martin Luther King Jr.'s famous letter from the Birmingham jail, right? That's what the white liberal Christians are telling people like MLK. Um, you will get this in time, but it's just not time yet. You're trying to move too fast right now. You're trying to move too quickly. So just notice how temporality is all around these structures of longing, right? Even going back to that example from Arlie Hochschild. On 76, he goes to Cuba and U.S.
Mr. Sabia? Mr. Sabia, can you hear me?
Yes. I can hear you.
Yeah, sir. It's just me and you at this point in time, and I don't wanna play this thing to the point where you are also reflecting and not speaking. Is there any input from your side as to it's I haven't noted you in the previous session, so welcome with us. Thank you for putting your time aside on this Sunday afternoon. And you are here clearly to engage and to develop intellectually. can you maybe just introduce yourself to me? What side of the country are you currently living in? Did you join? Are you in the group? Did you join via the link that is on Facebook? And what is your reflection on Fanon? And the first chapter, did you scroll through it, or are you also just here to take in um well, what you can take in and process during the session? So yeah, the floor is yours, sir. Thank you.
Yes, yes. Thank you. Indeed, my name is Mkontis Bia, but you can call me Prince. I'm living I'm in South Africa currently, and at University of Zululand. I hope you know it. I'm doing the second year. I was added by Chesley, Comrade Chesley, because we are doing public administration and economics at the class. So he told he what to say this, he introduced me to this group. He recently added me, so I don't know about the chapter that I was supposed to read. So it is my first time being here in the group, so I was here to learn actually.
Okay, my leadership, thank you. No, yeah, Chesley was also in the group. But yeah, I mean, you can continue the conversation, and then we can watch this gentleman again. So what is your understanding of Fanon? You second year, uh, so I assume you maybe like 2021. I'm 33 at this point in time. So, and I've been within the political space, the Pan African space, for over 10 years. I was also on university at University of the Western Cape. Let's say in 2014, I left. Right, was part and parcel of politics. I left just before what do you call this thing, before Fees Must Fall. So Fees Must Fall started in 2015. Yeah, currently I'm pursuing a degree in international relations. So I've also touched on certain economics modules, micro and macroeconomics, and yeah. So have you had any other political orientation up until this point? What is your understanding of Fanon as a scholar and as a thinker to the landscape of South Africa? Are you currently um, in student politics? Yeah, and what do you make of South Africa's even South Africa's political landscape, right? And we relate that to Fanon's kind of thinking. It's okay if you haven't read the first chapter. Yeah, the book is available on PDF. It's in the group bio on the WhatsApp, so you can always catch up, right? It's about 70, let's say close to 70 pages, the first chapter. The rest of the book will go very quickly, as we would like to finish by July, right? So for the past few Sundays, we've been about 4, 5, 6 people per Sunday in the group. So yeah, based on those questions, yeah, like what can you give your perspective on based on what I've asked you. And then yeah, I guess we can watch the another 10, 20 minutes of this film, and then we can call it a day, my leadership. But thank you for joining us. So yeah, I would just like to get your perspective, so we can yeah, engage in conversation, right? So yeah, thank you. Just
Um, I would like to share my perspective, but unfortunately, I'm new into politics because I recently, not a week ago, I just joined the student politics called SASCO. So I'm embarking myself on the journey of knowing politics because I just got to realize that everything evolves around politics. So it was wrong of me to being ignorant about politics because I have this perspective that says I want to involve myself in politics because politics is all to do with corruption and all type of stuff. So till the day I met Chesley, so he sat me down, explained some things for me. So the book I was reading not so long ago, it was book of Steve Biko. So that the only scholar that I have read of. So I'm just new into this space of politics. So I really don't have much to say, but probably by next week I will have something to share with. Thank you.
Okay, my leadership. So yeah, I just want to contextualize the best of what of how I can understand it, right? As to why Fanon, why we're reading Fanon. So Fanon is important as a decolonial thinker, and decolonial thinking is based on we have to stop thinking in terms of Europe, right? And how the European structured the world, and based on the fact that society is built on the canons of European thinking, right? So, and they based their laws and their frameworks and their systems on the dehumanization of black people, of the oppressed people of the world, right? And Fanon being inspired by, let's say, Marxist terminology, also uses um, a reference to bourgeois kind of thinking, right? And bourgeois systems, which is uh, to the benefit of the elite classes and the upper classes of society. And he references how the clash between capitalist systems and socialist systems are coming to an end, and the real question that humanity will have to deal with is the redistribution of wealth, right? uh, so he basically says that we need to be able to think and create a humanitarian system, a humanism that will redistribute the wealth and ensure that the oppressed, colonized world, the nations of the colonized world, are able to
Hello, are you still there, sir? Sir, are you still there? Hello. Okay, just leave alone.